He spent the night crying over her engagement, and the next morning he slid a ring across the table like nothing happened, asking me to spend forever with a man who was still mourning someone else. I never thought I'd have to wonder whether the person I loved the most saw me as their backup plan, but the night he cried over another woman and the morning he slid an engagement ring across the table, everything I believed about our relationship shattered like cheap glass. We met at one of those house parties where nobody really wants to be there, but everyone shows up anyway because it's what young people do when they're trying to convince themselves their 20s are more interesting than they actually are. I wasn't even going to go, but my roommate begged me to come out since I'd been cooped up studying for finals all week. That night, I noticed him sitting alone in the corner like he was allergic to conversation, arms folded and eyes glued to his drink like he was trying to hypnotize it. Honestly, I thought he was just some self-absorbed introvert with a superiority complex, but when Jake, our mutual friend, introduced us, he leaned in and said he's just shy around people he doesn't know. That was the first time I saw something soft in him. I'm not gonna lie, I was the one who made the first move. He was quiet, mysterious, and there was a sadness in his eyes that made you want to lean closer, like maybe if you did, you could help carry whatever it was he'd been holding on to. We exchanged numbers before I left, but he never texted. Still, something in me said to reach out first, so I did. It took him hours to respond, sometimes days, but little by little we started talking more. Eventually, we were visiting each other on weekends, me in Oregon finishing my degree, him in Washington working a tech job, and those long drives became the backbone of our relationship. For hours each way. But I was in love, or thought I was, and that made the miles feel worth it. When I graduated, I moved into his place. It just made sense. More jobs, more stability, and I was ready to build a life with him. But there was always this shadow in the background, his ex. The way he talked about her was never bitter or angry. It was like she'd been some kind of life coach wrapped in an angel's body. She always said never settle for less than what you deserve, he'd say, or she believed people who act like they don't care are usually the ones who care the most. It didn't seem malicious, but over time it wore me down. I couldn't help but feel like I was living in the afterglow of someone else's story. One night, during dinner with his work friends, someone brought up long-term relationships and he, without a beat, went into a 5-minute sermon about how wise his ex had been about love and self-respect. I remember smiling through it, nodding like it didn't bother me, excusing myself to the bathroom and just sitting there in the stall trying not to fall apart. I told myself it was harmless, that I was just being insecure. But in reality, I was slowly realizing I'd never once heard him speak about me the way he did about her. Still, I stayed. Because sometimes we convince ourselves that love means patience, that being the understanding partner makes us stronger. But what I didn't know then was that I wasn't being patient, I was being positioned. And when I say that, I mean I was being lined up as someone's plan B. I remember the night I first saw him crying over her. It was around 3 a.m. and I woke up needing to pee. I noticed he wasn't in bed, so I walked out to the living room and there he was, sitting on the couch, his face barely visible in the light of his phone screen. I heard the sniffling before I saw the tears. I didn't say anything. I just watched. His phone lit up his face and on the screen were pictures of her engagement. A diamond ring. Smiling faces. Him, alone in the dark, still mourning something that clearly hadn't left him. He didn't know I saw him. When he got up to use the bathroom, I glanced at his phone. My heart dropped. The way he looked at those photos. I'd never seen him look at me like that. The next morning? He was all smiles. Made coffee. Kissed me goodbye. Texted like usual. And I kept waiting for some sign of sadness, some honesty. But he gave me none. So I stayed quiet too. That was the beginning of the end, even if I didn't know it yet. Because once you see the person you love grieving someone else's future, you start to question where you really stand in their past and where you fit in there tomorrow. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't announce itself with yelling or doors slamming shut. It comes in waves of silence, in the way someone turns their back to you in bed and shakes just enough for you to notice, but not enough for you to ask. That's what the next few weeks felt like. He didn't say he was hurting, but his grief hung in the air like damp fog, always there, just out of reach and heavy on my chest. It happened again just a few nights after that first time. I woke up and he was gone from the bed. This time I didn't get up. I didn't want to see it again. I didn't want to feel that twist in my stomach as I watched the man I loved cry over a life he didn't get to have. I laid there pretending to sleep while the sound of his muffled sobs crept down the hallway like some kind of ghost I wasn't ready to confront. And then it kept happening. At first, it was maybe once a week. Then it turned into every few nights. Sometimes in the bathroom. Sometimes in the kitchen. Sometimes I'd hear him quietly weeping behind the closed door of our bedroom closet, like the clothes hanging there could absorb the tears better than I ever could. I started counting the cries like they were milestones. First week of February? Twice. Mid-February? 4 times. By March, I stopped keeping track, not because I was okay with it, but because I was too emotionally numb to keep tallying the ways he wasn't really here with me anymore. I asked him once, directly, when he came back from one of those late-night disappearances. He looked exhausted, red-eyed, but still trying to act normal. I asked, "What's going on with you?" And he said, "I've just been tired." That was it. Like all this sadness was a matter of poor sleep and a bad work schedule. Another night, he gave me some story about thinking of his childhood dog. Another time, he blamed a commercial for some life insurance company. I wanted to believe him, I really did, but his lies were paper-thin and I was done pretending they held weight. So I brought up therapy. I figured maybe he was dealing with something deeper, something that didn't even have to do with his ex. Maybe there were wounds I didn't know about, things he never shared. But when I suggested it, he got defensive. He snapped, not loudly, but with this edge in his voice I'd never heard before. He said, "Therapy's for people who can't deal with life." I'm fine. I remember just standing there in the middle of the living room holding my coffee like it was some kind of emotional shield. That conversation ended fast. He walked away, said he needed air, and didn't come back until after dark. That's when I started wondering if maybe I wasn't imagining things. Maybe there was more to that final conversation he had with his ex than he let on. A few months back, before all this really escalated, he told me she had texted him. Just a quick catch-up message, he said. He even showed it to me, which I appreciated. She'd asked how he was doing. He asked if it was okay if he replied. I said sure, not thinking much of it at the time. But now all those pieces didn't feel so harmless anymore. Now I wondered if that conversation never really ended. Maybe it grew into something else. Maybe the tears weren't just from missing her, they were from losing her all over again. I wanted answers, but where do you go when the person you need to talk to is the same person you can't trust to tell the truth? My best friend told me to walk away. She said, "You're not his person. You're his distraction." There's a difference. And that hurt more than anything he'd done, because deep down I feared she was right. I feared that I was only ever filling the silence she left behind. But I still wasn't ready to leave. I wasn't ready to admit that I'd spent years building a future with someone who still lived in the past. So I tried one more time. Over breakfast, I asked him, straight up, if he still loved her. He gave me that confused look like I'd just insulted him out of nowhere and said, "What? No, of course not. Why would you even ask that?" I told him I noticed he'd been crying a lot and that it all started around the time she got engaged. He got defensive again. Said he was just stressed. Said I was imagining things. Then he left for work early. Didn't finish his eggs. Didn't kiss me goodbye. That was the first time I looked at the man I loved and felt completely alone, even with him sitting across from me at the same table. It's wild how sometimes the quietest people you know can cause the loudest kind of heartbreak. I used to think love was about compromise, meeting each other halfway, picking your battles, riding through the lows to get back to the highs. But what they don't tell you is how dangerous it is to keep showing up for someone who's stuck in reverse, still trying to find a version of themselves in someone else's story. The night before everything really blew up, he didn't come home. No text, no call, just silence. I tried to rationalize it at first. Maybe work ran late, maybe his phone died, maybe he needed space after our awkward breakfast conversation. But hour after hour went by and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not wrong like car crash or emergency room wrong, but wrong like betrayal knocking at the front door while I stood frozen on the other side. I texted him in the morning, just a casual, "Hey, you coming home for dinner?" like I wasn't unraveling inside. He never answered. I called around 7 p.m. straight to voicemail. Called again at 9, same thing. I even called his job, thinking maybe he was pulling a late shift or crashed at a coworker's place. But the receptionist told me he'd left at his regular time. That's when the dread set in, not just the fear of where he was, but the bigger question of who he was with. It wasn't until almost midnight that I finally got a text. Not an apology, not an explanation. Just, "Sorry. Need some time to think. We'll be home tomorrow." That was it. No, I love you, no, don't worry, just a vague sentence that felt like the end of something. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I did something I'm not proud of. I opened his laptop. I've only done that once before, months ago, when I was battling my own insecurities about his ex. But something in me snapped this time, not out of jealousy, but desperation. I needed clarity. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind for feeling like the woman he loved wasn't me. It took a while to find it buried deep in a folder inside a folder named something stupid like Old Receipts. But there it was, an MS Word file named after her. I opened it expecting maybe an old letter or journal entry. What I found was a conversation. A transcript, maybe even a backup of their last messages before she cut him off. At first, it was just casual. Catching up, asking about work, life updates. Then he asked about her fiancé. She said she was happy. And that's when the shift happened. His words changed tone, got intense, desperate. Are you sure? I don't believe you're really happy. He'll never treat you like I did. And then the dagger, I've always believed we'd end up together. I sat there, hands shaking, reading paragraph after paragraph of a man confessing his love to someone else while sharing a bed with me. He told her he'd waited. That even as friends, he thought the door was still cracked open. He poured his heart out to a woman who had clearly slammed that door shut years ago. And her response? Brutal, honest, and probably the only kindness she ever did for me. She told him to go to hell. Told him he was selfish for saying all this while still with me. Told him I deserved better. She was right. The worst part wasn't even what he said to her. It was the realization that all those nights I held him while he cried, he wasn't grieving a memory, he was mourning a future he never got to have. A future he still believed was his. So when he walked in the next morning around 6 a.m. looking like he hadn't slept, I didn't say anything. He called me into the kitchen with the soft voice, like everything was fine. Like I hadn't just spent the night discovering that I was nothing more than the woman he settled for. There on the table was breakfast. Pancakes, fruit, coffee, his usual attempt at smoothing things over. But what shook me wasn't the food. It was the ring box in the center of the table. He smiled, that tired, familiar smile, and said something like, "These last 3 years have been an adventure. I want to keep making new ones with you." I opened the box. Beautiful ring. Simple. Thoughtful. But all I could see was a lifeboat, a ring meant to save him from drowning in rejection. He was proposing to me not because he couldn't live without me, but because she made it clear she could live without him. I snapped. All the anger, confusion, sadness, it came pouring out. I asked him where he was the day before, why he'd gone completely silent, why he'd been crying over her for months. I brought up the document, the messages, her engagement, everything. And he got angry. Said I should be happy because this was what I wanted, right? A proposal. A future. He couldn't even see how insulting that was, offering me a ring because Plan A had left the building. I asked him the question that finally ripped the curtain down. Why would you propose to someone when it's so obvious you're still in love with someone else? His answer? She's obviously moved on, so it's time I do too. He didn't choose me. He defaulted to me. You ever feel like your heart's still beating but you've already left the room? That's exactly what it felt like standing there in the kitchen, staring at that ring like it was some kind of joke the universe decided to play on me. I was holding proof that he wanted a future with me, but my soul already knew the truth. He only wanted that future because the one he really wanted slammed the door in his face. The rest of that morning was a blur. I remember him sitting at the table like nothing happened, legs crossed, laptop open, sipping his coffee like he hadn't just proposed with the most backwards logic I'd ever heard. And I stood there in silence for what felt like forever. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew that if I opened my mouth, I might say something I couldn't take back. I walked into the bedroom, picked up my phone, and called my dad. That was the first real step. Not toward revenge, not toward closure, but toward healing. My dad answered on the second ring, and all I said was, "Can you come get me?" He didn't ask for details. He just said, "I'm on my way." I think he could hear the crack in my voice and knew exactly what it meant. I started packing the essentials first. Clothes, toiletries, my journal, the sketchbook I hadn't touched in months. I didn't even bother folding anything. I just wanted out. I wanted distance. I needed to get back to a version of myself that didn't cry quietly in bathroom stalls or fake smiles at breakfast tables. He didn't say much while I packed. Just watched me from the couch like he was trying to decide if this was real or just another one of our quiet fights that would blow over in a day or two. But this wasn't a fight. This was a decision. This was me realizing that I'd been loving someone who still had one foot in a door that was never mine. Eventually, he spoke. "You're really gonna throw away everything we have over this?" I stopped mid-pack and looked him dead in the eyes. "I'm not throwing anything away. You already did that when you told her you've been waiting all these years. When you cried for her while sleeping next to me. When you used a proposal to patch a hole she left in you." He stood up then, angry now, arms out like he couldn't believe what I was saying. It was just a moment. I was in a different headspace. That conversation happened a long time ago. I pulled out my phone, opened the text he sent just hours before. Sorry. Need some time to think. And where were you yesterday? I asked, voice shaking now. Silence. He looked away, down at the floor like it held some kind of answer that might save him. But there was nothing left to save. Not for me. When my dad showed up an hour later, I walked out with 2 suitcases and a heart that felt 50 pounds heavier. My dad didn't say much, just gave me that look only fathers can give, the one that says you don't have to explain, I've got you. He helped me carry my bags down to the car while my ex sat on the couch like a ghost of the man I used to know. I thought I'd feel relief walking out that door, but all I felt was this numbness that stretched all the way to my bones. I wasn't just leaving a man. I was leaving behind the version of me that stayed quiet every time I felt small, every time I felt like second best and told myself it was just in my head. Even then, part of me wanted to turn around and scream at him, ask how he could do this to someone who gave him everything. But instead, I shut the door behind me. Later that night, as I sat on the bed in my childhood room surrounded by old posters and memories I thought I'd outgrown, I opened my phone and reread the messages in that document again. Not to torture myself, but to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that everything I felt was real, that my pain had roots. That was the night I decided I wouldn't be returning. Not for closure, not for conversation, not even for my things. Not until I was ready, because he didn't deserve another word from me until I'd figured out how to speak without bleeding. But the silence didn't last, because what he did next, that was the part one never saw coming. I thought leaving would be the end of it. I figured I'd go home, cry for a few days, get back on my feet, and maybe, just maybe, find some peace knowing I had finally chosen myself after years of being someone else's emotional safety net. But peace never really came. Not right away, and the silence I'd hoped for quickly twisted into something darker, something I didn't see coming. The first few days after I left were eerily quiet. No texts, no calls, no please come back, or we need to talk. And honestly, I was thankful for that. I needed the space. I needed to breathe without the weight of his confusion on my chest. My mom kept checking in on me, offering tea and casseroles like food could fill the hole in my chest. My dad stayed mostly quiet but hovered, always close by like he didn't trust the air around me just yet. And then, just when I started thinking maybe he'd accepted it, the messages started. Not from him directly at first. They came from friends, mutual ones, people I hadn't spoken to in months. Hey, just heard from him. He said you took some of his stuff when you left. Can you give me a call? He's trying to get in touch but says you're ignoring him. One even said, he's asking if he can use my Skype to talk to you. Wants to clear things up. That one stopped me cold. Skype? Who even uses Skype anymore? Why go through friends unless you're trying to slip past someone's walls? I told them all the same thing. I didn't steal anything. I didn't owe him a conversation. And under no circumstances were they to give him access to contact me through their accounts. And still, the calls started. Dozens of missed calls, all from different numbers I didn't recognize. One number would call me 20 times in a day. Then the next day, a new number, same thing. I blocked each one like clockwork, added them to a growing list that started to feel more like evidence than inconvenience. It was like being haunted by a ghost who refused to accept that he died. And then came the creepiest moment of all, one of those moments where your heart drops into your stomach and stays there. I went out for coffee with a friend, just trying to feel normal for an hour. We were laughing about something, some stupid memory from college, when I noticed a car in the parking lot that looked exactly like his. Same make, same model, even the same little dent near the passenger side mirror. I froze. My friend looked at me confused, then turned to see what I was staring at. But by the time we looked again, it was gone. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was just paranoia. But when you've spent 3 years with someone who could cry over another woman in the dark without ever telling you why, you start to question everything, even your own instincts. That night, I finally broke down and told my mom everything. Not just about the ring. Not just about the proposal. I told her about the document, the crying, the sleepless nights, the feeling of being compared to a ghost I never stood a chance against. She didn't say much while I talked, just held my hand, letting me unravel. When I finished, she said one thing I'll never forget. You made the right choice, baby. But you don't have to carry this alone anymore. And she meant it. The next day, she helped me get my phone number changed. We called the carrier, went through the steps, and within an hour, I had a clean slate. No more unknown numbers. No more rings at midnight that sent my anxiety through the roof. It felt like cutting a cord I didn't even realize was still tied around my neck. She also encouraged me to reconnect with friends. Not just the ones we shared, but the ones who knew me before him, before I started shrinking to fit into a relationship that was never built to hold me. So I started reaching out, telling people the truth, and to my surprise, most of them believed me. They didn't make excuses for him. They didn't say I was being dramatic or overreacting. They said, "That makes sense," or "I'm so sorry you went through that," or simply, "I'm here." It was like coming up for air after being underwater for too long. I started going out more. Not to meet anyone new, not yet, but just to remember who I was when I wasn't busy trying to be understanding of someone who didn't even understand himself. And slowly, I started feeling human again. But just when I thought I'd seen the worst of it, I found out he had one last card to play. He was getting on a plane, heading across the country, to win her back. Some things you hear and laugh at, not because they're funny, but because the absurdity is so loud it silences everything else in the room. That's how I felt when one of our mutual friends, one of the few still talking to him, called me out of the blue and said, "So, did you hear he flew to New York to see her?" I didn't even answer right away. I just let the words hang there in the air like smoke from a fire I didn't even start. Flew to New York for her. My first thought wasn't even anger, it was exhaustion. Because at this point, what else was left? He had spent months crying for her, wrote his love out like a man stuck in a high school romance novel, proposed to me just to save face, and now he was on a cross-country pilgrimage to try and revive a flame that she'd already poured ice water on. But the thing is, it wasn't just about him going, it was how far he went. One of our friends said he somehow found out the name of her company, showed up outside her building, and waited. Not for an hour. Not for lunch. All day. Like something out of a movie, except not the romantic kind. The kind where you scream at the screen, "Dude, go home. It's over." No one knows what happened when or if she even saw him. All I know is she didn't come back with him. And the way he came back told us everything we needed to know. That same friend told me that after he returned, he hit the bar hard. Got drunk and started rambling about losing the two most important women in his life. That he didn't know what to do. That everything felt like it was crumbling. He even tried to get the friend to talk to me on his behalf. But by then, I'd already built a wall he couldn't climb. Because here's the truth I was finally ready to say out loud. I spent 3 years being someone's second choice, and it wasn't even about her. Not really. It was about him, about his inability to let go of a version of himself he thought only she could validate. He wasn't in love with her. He was in love with the idea of what she represented, his youth, his potential, maybe even the version of himself he thought he could have been if she'd just stayed. And I was just the placeholder. The emotional cushion, the safe bet, but I'm not a placeholder. I'm not a backup plan. And I sure as hell wasn't put on this earth to wait around for a man to figure out who he is by running back to someone who already closed the book on him. The good news? That realization came with freedom. Back at my parents' place, things started shifting. Slowly but noticeably. My mom stopped hovering so much, letting me have my space. My dad, in his quiet way, started dropping little words of encouragement here and there. And me? I started doing little things that felt like me again. Cooking, sketching, reading, laughing, even sleeping better. And then the internship happened. It was a small company, nothing fancy, but it was something. And after months of feeling like I had no control over anything in my life, having a place to go, a schedule to follow, coworkers to joke with, it all felt like reclaiming pieces of myself one day at a time. That's when I met him. Not him, another him. The guy who hired me. Tall, soft-spoken, kind eyes. The kind of guy who holds the door without making it a performance. The kind who listens when you speak. We weren't anything, just co-workers. But he made the office feel light. Made me feel light. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was dragging my broken heart around like a suitcase too heavy to carry. It wasn't love. It wasn't even attraction in the romantic sense. It was a reminder that good men exist, that real peace doesn't come with grand gestures and dramatic speeches. It comes with consistency, with kindness, with just being seen. I didn't want a relationship. Not yet. I wasn't ready. But I knew what I wanted when the time came. I wanted the kind of man who made life feel calm, not chaotic. who didn't look at me like I was an option because to him I'd be the obvious choice. So when my ex tried reaching out again through one of our friends, asking if he could just explain everything, I didn't even hesitate. I told them to let him know I wished him healing. But I had already moved on. Not to someone else. To myself. 3 months after I left, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Just a small padded envelope with my name on it in his handwriting. For a second, I just stared at it like it might explode. It had been weeks since I last heard anything from him directly. After the airport stunt, he kind of vanished from my radar, which was exactly what I needed. But seeing his writing, it shook something loose. I opened it slowly, part of me bracing for a letter. Some long-winded explanation or last-ditch attempt at redemption. But there was no letter, no apology, no closure, just the ring. That same engagement ring he'd laid in the middle of our breakfast table. The one that was supposed to mark the beginning of a life together, but instead ended it. Holding it again was strange. Like holding an echo. It was still beautiful, still sparkled in the light. But it didn't mean a damn thing anymore. Not to me. I didn't want to keep it, but I also didn't want to send it back through the mail. What if he claimed it never arrived? What if he tried to use it as some excuse to reach out again? I didn't want to give him that chance. So I asked my dad if he could deliver it for me. He didn't even blink. Say less, he told me. I don't know what my dad said when he dropped it off. I didn't ask and he didn't volunteer. But he came back looking calm, like whatever needed to be said had been handled. And honestly, that was enough for me. A week later, I heard from another mutual friend that my ex was spiraling. Apparently, after New York, things hadn't exactly gone his way. She didn't take him back. Of course she didn't. And word was he started unraveling. Drinking more. Going out alone. Saying wild things at bars. He even told someone that he lost the only 2 people who ever truly knew him. As if that was supposed to sound deep instead of just sad. And then, the icing on the cake, he bought another plane ticket. Back to New York. I don't even know what he was hoping for the second time around. Redemption? A miracle? A movie moment where she'd see him waiting outside her job with tired eyes and messy hair and just melt into his arms? Whatever fantasy he was chasing, it didn't happen. She didn't come back with him. She didn't even acknowledge him publicly, as far as I could tell. And after that, the mutual friend said he kind of disappeared. Deleted a bunch of social media, stopped responding to most people. Just vanished into his own mess. And you know what? That used to hurt. Used to tear at something in me, knowing that the man I gave my heart to had crumbled so far chasing something that never wanted him back. But by now, I felt peace. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Just that cool, quiet kind of peace you get when you've finally stepped away from the fire and realized how warm the sun can be without burning you. Because my life, it was slowly rebuilding. I was still at my internship, which had turned into a possible full-time offer. I'd gotten closer to a few coworkers, especially the guy who hired me. And even though we weren't anything more than work friends, it felt good to be around someone who didn't see me as fragile or broken. And I'd found a little apartment. Nothing fancy. Just a 1-bedroom with good light and a balcony big enough for a couple plants and a fold-up chair. But it was mine. Fully mine. I remember standing in the middle of it on move-in day, surrounded by boxes and silence, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. There was no crying man in the next room. No shadow of another woman's name floating through the air. No voice in my head asking, "What more can I give?" Just me. Just quiet. Just peace. Every now and then, I still get updates about him. Not because I ask, but because mutual friends still assume I care. I don't. I listen politely, nod when necessary, then change the subject. I've learned that moving on isn't about forgetting someone. It's about remembering yourself. And lately, I've been remembering a lot. How I used to laugh so hard I'd cry over nothing. How I used to write poetry in the margins of old notebooks. How I used to believe that love should never feel like competition. Now, I'm just building a life that doesn't feel like waiting. It's strange how closure doesn't always come wrapped in a neat goodbye or a final confrontation. Sometimes, It comes in the quiet way your heart stops aching when you hear their name. Sometimes it's in the way you stop looking over your shoulder. Sometimes it's in a deep breath you didn't know you were holding. A few weeks after I moved into my new place, I found myself walking through the city after work, the wind brushing past my face like an old friend. I had no plans, no calls to return, no messages to decode, just time, and for once it was mine. I ended up at this bookstore I used to love back in college. I hadn't stepped inside in years, but something pulled me there that night. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was instinct. I browsed for a while, flipping through pages like I was searching for something, though I wasn't sure what. Eventually, I picked up a blank journal, and for the first time since everything unraveled, I started writing. Not about him, not about the pain, just about me, my thoughts, my fears, my hopes, the things I'd buried beneath years of being understanding and low maintenance and cool. I filled 2 pages without even realizing it, and when I finally looked up, the world felt different. Lighter. I didn't know it then, but that night marked the beginning of something real. A kind of healing that doesn't ask for attention or applause. It just happens. And in the months that followed, I started living again. I found new routines. Woke up early on Sundays to make coffee and sit on my balcony. I joined a local book club, reconnected with old friends. I even signed up for a painting class, something I hadn't done since high school. As for him, he never reached out again. No apology, no letter, no attempt to justify what he did or ask how I was. Just silence. And surprisingly, I was okay with that, because by the time the silence came, I no longer needed his voice to feel whole. I found out later, through someone who still spoke to his cousin, that his trip to New York didn't go the way he hoped. Apparently, she had told him, clearly and finally, that there was no place for him in her life anymore, that she'd moved on, that he needed to do the same, and maybe he will someday, but his story no longer feels like mine to carry. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if he had chosen me fully, if he hadn't spent 3 years with one foot still stuck in the past, if that ring had come without the baggage, the heartbreak, the months of tears over a woman who wasn't me. But wondering won't change anything, and the truth is, I'm not sure I'd want that version of love anymore, because love isn't supposed to feel like an audition. It's not meant to be earned by patience or quiet suffering. It should never make you feel like a runner-up in your own story. A few weeks ago, I saw a couple sitting on a bench downtown. The guy had his head on her shoulder, eyes closed, just resting. She was reading, one hand still gently holding his. There was no drama, no performance, just presence. And I realized that's what it should feel like. Not chaos, not uncertainty, just stillness. And I smiled. Not because I was sad, not because I missed him, but because I knew that one day I'd have that too. Not with him, but with someone who sees me clearly, who chooses me the first time, who doesn't look at me as a second chance or a safe landing, but as the love they always hoped for. And until that day comes, I'll be here, choosing myself, again and again, every single time.